And welcome on into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. Please subscribe wherever you get your pods at Blue Horseshoe Pod, or check us out on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Podcast as well. George, a big topic we talked about after the blowout loss to the Bengals on Sunday afternoon was how this team was going to respond to the first loss in 4 games, first loss in really over a month, but also, too, a loss of this caliber where you just got beat in every phase. You beat yourself a lot. It was one of the more deflating and just one of the bigger blowout games of the season. You were able to talk to a few members of the Colts on Monday. What was the sense in around the team, George, again, about 24 hours or so removed from that blowout loss? Because we talked about that loss with this team going one of two ways. They can either get galvanized, have it serve as a wake-up call and use it to be better, or have this kind of carry over and maybe lead into another loss or two. What was the team mood like the last 24 hours or so now after that loss?
Yeah, we most had the coaches on Zoom yesterday, but it was very similar to the locker room after the game in terms of people just kind of taking ownership of the fact that there were a lot of things that went wrong. Some of those things you got to credit to the Bengals because they came out and took it to the Colts, and some of those things you got to look internally and figure out why certain things didn't go the way they should. I think the screen passes are a great example of that. That's still a huge topic. Obviously, with those 3 plays going for 124 yards, and one of them directly is a touchdown, the other 2 setup scores. A lot of that was just assignment football. People not being where they were supposed to be, not cutting the ball back inside. All the little things you got to do to make sure that if those go for 9 or 10 yards, they still hurt, but it's a totally different outcome, obviously, than the one that you saw on Sunday. So I think there's from a coaching staff, there's a lot of recognition of there's things they have to do better too. It's not just, hey, the play has to improve on the field. We've got to find a way to put these guys in better positions. And, I think I think the thing about it and why, and you mentioned it right there at the top, that makes it such a sobering loss is that, a lot of times you can go back and say, well, if the offensive line plays better, it'll fix this. If the defensive secondary plays better, this was across the board. Every unit, every phase, everybody had some hand in this. We talk about team wins all the time. That was a good team win. This was a bad team loss. And everybody had some blame in it. And I think from the coaches to the players, the good news is they all recognize that.
And that's why I think, at least optimistically, until we actually see the game played and see this team responds, I do think this loss can be treated more as a positive than a negative, especially this late in the season, because I think it can, like you said, make you just work harder, keep you motivated as well, and not let things get stale or overconfident moving forward, because these games are so important that, again, lapse in focus, especially, again, against a team in the Steelers that you can easily overlook. Like, this team is coming off of 2 losses in a row to a 2-win Cardinals team and a 2-win Patriots team, both those games at home. It's really easy to say in your mind, if you're the Colts, this is going to be a walkover win. This is an easy win for us. And we'll just kind of throw our helmets out there and then we'll get the win, no problem. Like, this is a game where if you overlook the Steelers, Mike Tomlin's made an entire career out of winning games against teams that don't take the Steelers seriously, or maybe, get lulled to sleep by that they're not really this big of a factor. They're not really that good. And that's why I think the timing of this loss and how they lost, like you said, a total team loss where every single unit, every single phase of the game was flat out bad. And I think it does kind of serve as a nice wake-up call, almost like a douse of cold water to the face, if you will, to kind of wake you up and say, oh, we need to refocus here. We're not as good as we think. We got kind of maybe lulled into a sense of complacency the last month, and now it's like it kind of serves as a reboot. I really think if we see a fast start on Saturday, George, I think that's can be attributed to kind of maybe the sense of urgency not being back, because I don't want to say that they were overconfident. They weren't really feeling their oats per se, but again, it's human nature just to kind of be like, oh, we're really good. Let's just keep it rolling here. I think it is nice once in a while to kind of, for lack of a better term, get punched in the face.
And one of the things you mentioned after the game, the Bengals were a very desperate team. And when you look at their remaining schedule, you understand why. I think the last 2 weeks they knew going down to Jacksonville, they had to win that game or they were going to be in a really bad spot with this crowded AFC playoff picture. And the same thing was true for them on Sunday. If they lose They were going to be a game behind, this group of, it would have been five, that six now teams that had them seven with Cleveland. So if they'd lost, there still would have been, all those teams that had been a game back. Now they're the only team they're behind is Cleveland by a game. They're in this massive 6-way tie for the last two spots. But when you look at what they've got left coming up, Minnesota, who obviously is not scaring anybody offensively, but is in the heat of the NFC playoff race. Very similar position in the other conference to where Cincinnati is in the AFC. Then they're going to play Pittsburgh, the same team the Colts have on Sunday, and obviously they're in the playoff hunt here. Then they're going to play Kansas City, who I think is probably is dangerous right now as anybody, coming off 4 losses in 6 games, and you saw the frustration coming from them, and they're at a point where they need a win. And I think that even you wonder sometimes, you play Kansas City in week 17, are they going to have anything to play for? Yes, they will when this one rolls around, in a couple of weeks. And then they close out the year with Cleveland, which could be a tremendously big game in the same way the Colts and the Texans could be. So if Cincinnati, I think going into that stretch, you knew you couldn't lose either of these last 2 games. And the Colts weren't able to really match that intensity on Sunday. And you wonder, Saturday, Pittsburgh's maybe even more so in that boat, coming off those 2 losses you just talked about against 2 of the worst teams in the league. And now they know, I haven't looked at their schedule coming up, but I know they at least play Cincinnati the next week. And I'm sure they've got another division game in week 18, which means that won't be an easy one, no matter who it is. It's got to be Baltimore if Cincinnati's playing Cleveland. So, maybe the Ravens have clinched, but the way the AFC is, I doubt it. The way things are right now, as tight as it is, it's hard to imagine that they've clinched the number 1 seed at that point. So they're going to need the game. If you're Pittsburgh, this elimination game, for all intents and purposes, and it. So, and you just mentioned Mike Tomlin and the job that he's done over almost 2 decades there now in Pittsburgh. What he brings to the table. I think we talked after the game on Sunday that the Colts' inexperience cost them, not being in this type of situation. It's not just the players; the coaches are really in these roles for the first time too. Shane Steichen has been to the Super Bowl, but not as a head coach,
right?
And Jim Bob Cooter last year was part of that great run that Jacksonville had to win the division and win that playoff game in epic fashion, but not as the offensive coordinator. And Gus Bradley's probably the only one, of the top coordinators, and Brian Mason's in the NFL for the first time, the special teams coordinator. So all of this is new to him. But Gus Bradley's probably the only one back when he was with Seattle, and I think a little bit with the Chargers, who's been in this position, defense coordinator, and been in these type of big late season games. So they're kind of learning too. That Pittsburgh staff is not. They just went through it last year. And Tomlin's been through it majority of his career. I mean, he's never had a losing record. So games always matter for him in December and January. I think the coaching staff learned too. It's not just the players. The coaches learned this week too.
That's a good point, because you are right. Like, a lot of these guys in the new roles they're in have not been in this position. We talked a lot about that from the player perspective, but the coach perspective is 100% right. This is a learning experience for them too. And like I said, especially talking to them on Monday, George, it sounds like they understand what's at stake, and hopefully it can understand what went wrong on Sunday and be able to fix it in time for Saturday's game against the Steelers. You look back last year, I know it's different because Shane was the offense coordinator in Philly, not the head coach, so it is a major difference. But last year, and I also know it was Jalen Hurts was out. This is part of the reason why they lost 2 games in a row. But when Philly was red hot, then they had Jalen Hurts go out, and you lose at home to the Saints, and you lose to the Cowboys in December. And things are starting to slip. I know it's with a backup quarterback, ironically enough, Gardner Minshew, but they were able to get things back on track in Philly to obviously go to the Super Bowl. Getting your quarterback back helps. In this case, obviously, it's not going to happen. We hope that Shane can kind of call upon that, where there's a little bit of a slide there in middle to late December. And the Eagles obviously were able to figure it out before the playoffs came and get back on the right page. I hope that there were some learning lessons that Shane could take from last year just alone that are still fresh in his mind on how to get this team refocused, playing better, and just sharper in all 3 phases here in order to, like I said, get back on track on what is it can't be understated, George, a massive, massive game, especially now that week 14 is in the books and you look at the playoff standings going to week 15, you mentioned before, we have 6 teams right now sitting there at 7-6. The Steelers lead it off in the 6th spot. It goes all the way down to the Bills in slot number 11. And right now, the biggest thing going in the Colts' favor and why this game is, we talked about the Bengals game meaning triple for just how important it is with tiebreakers and conference record and everything. This is truly a game that means double, George, because not only right now, again, are you playing a team that's directly in front of you on a similar record, so you would have basically a 2-game edge if you win this game over the Steelers with 3 games to go. It also really helps secure your spot in the AFC playoff race because one of the first tiebreakers used is conference record. And right now, the Colts, along with the Steelers, are tied for the best conference record at 5-4. And that's a big reason why, even though the Colts lost to the Bengals in this 6-way tie, the Colts are still ahead of Cincinnati because the Colts are 5-4 and the Bengals are 3-6. And so this is a game that is double because you get to play the Steelers and directly leapfrog them if you win. But then also you move to 6-4 in conference and really give yourself some big time cushion for any tiebreaker or multiple team tiebreaker, 3, 4, 5 team tiebreaker that you may face in week 17, 18. You give yourself a big foot here forward in terms of getting one of those tiebreakers on your side, even if in the case of the Browns and the Bengals, you don't have the head-to-head tiebreaker in your favor.
Yeah, I don't know what makes you think there might be multi-team tiebreakers. I don't know what about this conference right now gives you that impression. But and it goes up, above the wild card spots too. I mean, Cleveland is the big winner from last week because they're 8-5 and they're ahead of this group. But who knows? This picture's changing so much from week to week because everybody's so tight. That 6-way tie is insane when you think about it. It's more than a third of the conference that's tied right now for the last 2 playoff spots. There's only 16 teams in the conference. 6 of them have the same record and are between 6 and I think 11 on the playoff scale right now, which is just ridiculous in so many ways. Everybody in the conference is still alive mathematically, except for New England. That's insane in and of itself. Normally, by this point, you got a couple other teams that have mathematically eliminated themselves. Nope. Everybody else is still technically still alive. 15 teams can still make the playoffs. And from week to week, it's such a huge switch. And then Monday night was another great reminder of that, where Tennessee goes on the road and in the last 3 minutes rallies from 2 scores down to beat the Dolphins. And you talked about at the top of the show, like there's nobody really pulling away. Miami is one of those teams that on the verge of, okay, maybe they had a chance to do it, and they lose at home to Tennessee, who now is sitting there thinking, get a win next week over Houston, and it's not entirely. They got to win out. They have to be 9-8, but because of the nature of the AFC right now, they're not dead. They're not out. They can still rally. But even to your point on this rambling answer here, at the very beginning, what you're talking about, these tiebreakers, even some of these division leaders, if they fall back, Kansas City is a game ahead of this group right now. Jacksonville's a game ahead of this group right now. And I think the Dolphins are 2 games ahead of this group right now. So even if we see a change at the top of one of these divisions, they're just going to be right in the middle of all this. The jumble is so tight that, I think this conference record is huge. It is right now the reason why, if the season ended today, the Colts would be the 7th seed because of that conference record. Pittsburgh and the Colts are at the top of this crazy 6-team tie because of that. But you have no idea what it's going to look like after we play another round of games, this weekend. And that's why I think it's critical that the Colts get the W because, are there scenarios where they lose to Pittsburgh and get in? The way this is, sure, there's scenarios anything happens, and they get in. But when you look at how crowded this is and how many of these teams are playing each other down the stretch, because, again, it's a third of the conference, so a bunch of them are playing each other, you have got to win Saturday. I mean, it's just every other scenario becomes so crowded and convoluted yes, the Colts have an easier schedule the rest of the way than a lot of these other teams, but it doesn't do any good if you don't take care of business up front.
That's why I think like we mentioned a little bit on Sunday after the Bengals game, we're looking ahead, but I think there's no way to overstate it. This is a playoff game. Like I right now, when you look at how crowded this is, yes, technically if the Colts lose, they're still alive and they still could make it mathematically. They need a lot of help, but there's still obviously a chance. We've seen crazy things happen. This to me though just feels with how this team is playing right now, if they lose this game, I can't really see them making the playoffs. If they win this game, I don't see how they miss the playoffs. I think this is, George, a true playoff game for the Colts here in week 15. Where you win, I think you are in. If you lose, I think you're done, personally. And so that's why you have two teams right now that I think are looking at that game, by the way, both ways. If you're the Steelers, you lose this game and now you've lost 3 games. I think it would actually be 4 games in a row. I could be wrong about that. I'm going to triple check, but obviously they lost bare minimum the last 2 games against 2 of the worst teams in the league. If you go to Indy and lose, I'm sorry, they beat the Bengals, but then lost to the Browns. They've lost 3 out of 4 coming into Sunday or Saturday. So if you lose this game and lose 4 out of 5, the season's spiraling. You can't feel good or confident about your playoff chances. So that team is going to be desperate. And again, if you're the Colts here, where you had on your schedule Bengals, Steelers, back-to-back weeks, 2 teams that are directly either below you or above you in a very tight playoff race, you can't go 0-2 and expect to still make the playoffs. George, I think this is the game on Saturday. Either when we were talking about this game in the post game, it's either going to be they're going to the playoffs or their season is over.
Just a good chance. I mean, you go back to college football and Separation Saturday. That's what it feels like here. One of those games where everybody knows the loser's pretty much out and the winner, has a chance to play for something far more important. So it's kind of fitting that it's on Saturday.
That's
those
true.
are the games that come into play here, and I think it's going to be it's national audience, which is only I think the second time that's happened this year. It's big for the Colts in a lot of ways. I mean, you want to go out there and show last week was a fluke. You want to obviously strengthen your playoff chances, and you want to show the national audience, hey, we're here too. The talk has been rightfully so, Houston and everything that they've been doing down there, and CJ Stroud. The Broncos stole some of the spotlight for a while because they didn't lose for like 2 months. The Colts have kind of quietly just been that team in this race, just chugging away. Buffalo's had a lot of spotlight because they should be much higher up than they are. It feels like all 5 teams that they're in this tie have gotten more attention throughout the year than the Colts have. And this is a chance for the Colts to change that. And then it's with good reason. The Colts have a first-year rookie head coach. Their quarterback got hurt early. A lot of people turned away from this team weeks ago. And now is a chance to go on Saturday in a national spotlight in a game that is dripping with playoff implications, and kind of remind everybody you're still here.
So this seems and it screams like it's Ohio State, Michigan from a few weeks ago. Who's who?
Oh man,
you want to be the cheaters or you want to be the Buckeyes? It's a no-win situation.
Pittsburgh has dominated the series lately, but I'm not even sure which way that goes. I mean, most recently, obviously, it's been a Michigan series. We're going over the amount of time that Pittsburgh's dominated it. It's more an Ohio State series. It's tough to say. I know this much. Pittsburgh's going to bring a large crowd into Lucas Oil Stadium on Saturday. And those fans are going to be as desperate as the team is. The Colts should be too, because of all the reasons that you just mentioned. Yeah, you've got cushion behind this. You've got games that aren't as difficult. Although, I mean, you're going to go to Atlanta next week, and the Falcons are going to be desperate because they lost the game to the Bucks, and they're no longer in the division lead. And then the Raiders are going to come in here, and if nothing else, it's going to bring back memories of 2021 when they came and beat the Colts and helped ruin the playoff chances. And then obviously Houston at the end of the year could be for all the marbles. So it's an easier schedule than say what Cincinnati's facing, but it's not like it. There's 3 pillow fights left after this. It's going to be situations. Colts have got to focus and they've got to play well, and they didn't play well on Sunday. And I think that's sort of the whole point of this pod right now. I think is Can they avoid that hangover that they had the last time they played this poorly was New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the end of that 3-game losing streak. And they bounced back and won 4 in a row. You do that again, I'll go on a limb here. You win 4 in a row again, you'll make the playoffs.
That would I agree with. That I lock it up, George. That is an absolute guarantee. But it also like is one of those things like where I think also being at home for this game on Saturday like makes it all that more important. Where it's like you do, I think, reap what you sow. And in this case, like if you can't win, if you are not desperate enough, number one, but if you can't win at home against a team that's reeling, who's also in a playoff spot with you after you just got your butt beat, it's one of those things where you could again find your way and back your way into the playoffs. But it's like you don't create your own luck or you don't create your own margin for error. And while yes, they won 4 games in a row, got themselves back into the race, that's all well and good. But it's also they had to do that because they put themselves in a 3-5 hole where they needed a 4-game win streak just to be in the position they are now. And now it's one of those things where that all goes away if you can't win. Like it's crazy to say like a 4-game winning streak can be erased by 2 games. That's exactly what could happen here. You lose at home to the Steelers on Saturday. All that goodwill from the last month and a half that they had, including if you want to include the bye week as well, to really stretch it out, it's all gone. That's why this game's so important.
There's no question about that. And I think from a narrative standpoint, it's very similar to New Orleans and Tampa Bay when they were coming in here. And both those teams were struggling and they needed a win in the worst way. And they were kind of, we'll talk to our guest tomorrow or Thursday, get the Pittsburgh perspective. But there's a lot of reports out there right now, these sort of discontent on the sideline. There's some pulling apart of that team. New Orleans was doing that when they came in, the Colts lost. Tampa Bay was doing that when they came in, the Colts won. And I think it's a different challenge because both those teams were they both have good defenses, but they were both more offensively oriented. You were more afraid of, the skill position guys, obviously in New Orleans that ended up winning that game. And Mike Evans, who ended up having a really good game, Chris Godwin, were a big challenge, when Tampa Bay came in. Pittsburgh, it's more TJ Watt. I mean, that's what you're concerned about. That's the game breaker coming in, on Saturday. But I think it's still a similar idea of here's a team at a crossroads. Both of them are. And are you going to allow them to get right against you? Or are you going to, more or less, I think, bury that team if the Colts win on Saturday?
Without a doubt. And this is, you got to finish the job there. It's simple as that. It's right in front of you. You have to take this opportunity and really capitalize on it. It's like one of those things where if you can't do it, you don't deserve to make the playoffs. And two, especially again, being at home, you talked about the Steelers travel really well. There's going to be a lot of black and yellow in the crowd, but this is also a game, George, where it's not just on the players. It's not just on the coaches. It's on the crowd. Like we just saw on Sunday, and you were there. That was an energetic, lively, playoff caliber crowd the Bengals had, and that team fed off of it early, and it really kind of not shell shocked the Colts, I want to say, but you saw it. It at least will galvanize the Bengals and gave them some juice to help win that game. If you're going to the game on Saturday, George, this is a playoff game. You have to treat it like a playoff game. Be loud, be into it, and make this truly a home field advantage. Because again, especially coming off a 20-point loss to the Bengals, like this is a team that, especially being young, feel like it could go one of two ways, right? You can get shell shocked and see this moment, be scared of it, or on the other way, like you can be energized. Again, kind of get up after you get knocked down, come back stronger. And especially if you have a home crowd that's loud, that's like electric behind you, that can really kind of give that extra push across the finish line to especially what is a young team that could feed off of that crowd, maybe more than a veteran team would. This is a huge game here for the fans as well, going to make sure that is not a Pittsburgh takeover, that it's not even a neutral game, that is a true Colts home game. And it's a playoff-like atmosphere because both teams, this is a playoff game. It's a playoff game in December. No other way about it. First one in almost a decade at Lucas Oil Stadium. Fans, if you're going on Saturday, you have to treat it like that.
There's no question. They've played at home since 2014. I think they beat the Bengals, if I remember correctly, in that game. Last time the Colts played a home game in the playoffs, obviously.
That feels like forever ago.
No, it was. I mean, from a franchise standpoint, there's obviously nobody on this roster who played in that game. There's no coach who was here for that game. I don't think Bremer Ryan was even here as a player.
I was going to say just Irsay?
Yeah, because Chris Ballard wasn't here. and some other
Jeez.
people in the front office, but for the most part, yeah, I mean, Ursay and Pete Ward, you know, pretty much the rest of this franchise has completely changed over since then. But also, the Colts have not been taking care of business at home. I think that's a really incredibly important element coming in this game. 3 of your last 4 at home. The only road game left is Atlanta, and on Christmas Eve. After that, you've got 2 home games to finish. You've obviously got Pittsburgh this week. You're 2-4 at home, and you have got to finish with a winning record at home. And that goes back to what you were just saying about winning this game. If you can't win this game in this situation, you probably don't deserve to be in the playoffs. If you can't finish with a winning record at home, you probably don't deserve to be in the playoffs. They've got to take care of business, in these last 3 home games. And this one in particular will set the tone, I think, for the last 3 weeks because of everything you were just saying. Are you going to have every tiebreaker against you and possibly be looking up at 5 other teams a game ahead of you, depending on what happens, around the rest of the league this week? Or are you going to be at the top of that heap and have, at least a couple tiebreakers in your back pocket? That's how big this game is. I mean, it's the difference right now between being 8-6 and 7-7 in the AFC is probably 5 or 6 spots in the standings.
It's massive. It's absolutely massive. And it just goes back to, again, like kind of like almost like karma in a way, where it's just like you have playoff caliber teams right, on your schedule. Bengals, Steelers, obviously it was, Falcons, just because the division is crap, and the Texans at the end of the year. And it's like you can't expect to make the playoffs if you're not beating those teams. Like, it's not just one of those, oh, it's a great story. Like, we're just going to put you into the playoffs because you guys overcome so much and it's been fun to watch. No, if you earn being a playoff team this year, maybe more than ever, with the fact that we're talking about 6 teams right now. It's 7-6 with 4 games to go. You are truly going to earn it. And like you said, between the home record, between now playing teams in front of you like this, it can't be overstated how important this game is. And it does feel like one of those games where, again, like you earn your breaks. And if you can't take care of business at home, period. If you can't take care of business at home, but your Colts have not done, you don't deserve to make the playoffs. If you can't beat teams that are on your level, that are fighting for a playoff spot with you, whether it's home or on the road, you don't deserve to be in the playoffs. And so right now, the Colts have done really neither of those things for the most part. Been a bad home team. And right now, at least in recent times, of one playoff team they played in the AFC, they lost to the Bengals here the last 6-week stretch. So you have not taken care of business in your own conference. You've not taken care of business at home. It's like if we outline before the year, George, how do you make the playoffs? It's the opposite of the 2 things we just said. You win your home games and you take care of those games in the division or in your conference to set you up to be in that playoff spot. If you can't do that, and this is really, that's why this game feels like the last stand, George. Sure, you can go to Atlanta and win that game in Atlanta. Does it help your conference record? Obviously not. And you could beat the hapless Raiders at home. But it's just like, it's one of those things where if you can't beat the Bengals, can't beat the Steelers, sure, beating the Raiders could be nice. But if you, again, are behind all those tiebreakers and have a lot of other teams in your position with head-to-head battles and advantages over you, you can't expect to make the playoffs. And that's why, again, this game is just so important. And it cannot, like, if you're Shane Steichen, again, you have to play like your season is on the line. You have to game plan like your season is on the line. The Steelers are doing that. And especially, like I said, the infighting. I mean, Mike Tomlin may never get fired, but definitely locally, I think a lot of Steelers fans are done with him as well. So he is someone who says he doesn't pay attention to the outside noise, but I feel like it's impossible to miss it. So you could argue Tomlin's coaching for his job as well in this game. Like, the Steelers are going to be fighting and clawing because everything this week is on the line for them. The Colts, it's the same thing. You have to match that. And anything less than, look, if they lose, it's disappointing. But at least if they come out, match the energy of the Steelers, you can live with it. If you come out flat like you did against Cincinnati for the second week in a row at home against a team that just wants him more than you, inexcusable, George. That's totally inexcusable.
Yeah, there cannot be anything close to resembling a repeat of last week. That would be a major red flag for Shane Steichen, honestly.
Yeah.
This was, we talked about, losing all three phases in every unit. They lost as a coaching staff in that game too. I mean, it was probably, I would say it was Shane's worst game in terms of getting them totally prepared and ready for the moment. Because really outside of like a 25-second stretch in the second quarter, it never felt like the Colts were in that game. They were getting run over defensively. The offense couldn't move. And that obviously is going to reflect on the head coach. They really didn't do anything in the second half. They could never get back into the game. A lot of that was penalties and silliness on their part. But again, ultimately, and Shane be the first to say it, ultimately that reflects on the head coach. And so, the coaching staff has to bounce back on Sunday. We've given them a lot of praise with good reason throughout this year. They didn't have a good game Sunday either. So, you got to come back. But I will say this. It's a good thing college playoff committee is not involved here because both the Steelers and the Colts will be gone. Their quarterbacks are hurt. They're not allowed in.
And they're not undefeated either. So, I mean, if Florida State had a case, the Colts are like, they're not even in the top 12 right now. So you're right. Bonus style points don't matter, which is definitely good for this team considering some of the wins they've had and how ugly it's been in some of them as well. Just win. As Al Davis will rip it off of him. Just win, baby. Speaking of which, George, coaching staff, 100% spot on. Just winning, spot on. How do the Colts, like obviously beating the Steelers is how they do it. But like in the game, George, how do the Colts be able, like where's the area where they have to improve drastically in terms of winning this game on Saturday? Keep doing that.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard, right? Because you can't. It's hard to remember that they're playing on Saturday. That's the Big Ten championship game or something.
That's true.
Same venue, and one of the teams has the same colors. So I'm sure the Colts fans will be happy if it ends for the gold and black the same way it did in the Big Ten championship game. But we'll see how that turns out.
Sign up for that offensive outburst. That's for sure.
That was
0 points.
The whole Raiders Vikings game was coordinated by Brian Ferentz, I think. But if you look at where the Colts were in that 4-game winning streak and what was going right, the most obvious thing is the pass rush. 21 sacks during that stretch, 17 of them in the last 3 games of that stretch, 2 back-to-back 6-sack games, and then on Sunday in Cincinnati, 0. And that is a 180. And so I think you've got to turn that around. I mean, you're not going to beat very many teams in this league if you're not putting pressure on the quarterback. And I think in Pittsburgh in particular, with Trubisky being a backup, who we know has had his struggles throughout his career, but who was the number 2 pick coming in. So there's talent there. There are things that he can do. You've got to make him the reason Pittsburgh loses the game. You've got to get after him, get him on the ground as much as possible, but also get him to throw some interceptable balls or fumble or, do some of these game-changing turnovers, especially with Pittsburgh's defense being as solid as it is and as, turnover hungry as it is. You have got to force Trubisky into making a few mistakes. But I think offensively, it's the run game, which is gone lately. I mean, it's been about a month here. Tampa Bay, of all teams, the one team you would least expect it to be, is the only team the Colts ran the ball against in the last, I think, 5 games. Everybody else, it's under 100 yards. On Sunday, the run game was on a milk carton. It was completely non-existent. And I think for so many reasons that hurts this football team. But first and foremost is, we just mentioned, you've got a backup quarterback. And the more you put on his shoulders, the more quarterback-centric you make the offense, the harder it is. So they've got to find a way to run the ball, to open up some passing lanes, but also to just take some pressure off Gardner Minshew's shoulders.
And that's where I feel like a lot of that's on Shane Steichen on Saturday, because there was not a lot of creativity in the run game on Sunday. I mean, they barely tried to run the ball. Again, it was like, I think 9 of the first 10 plays were pass plays to start the game. So even though you're going against literally and statistically the worst rush defense in the league, it was a pass heavy attack from the start. And so there was not a lot of trying to establish the run. And when they did, it was shotgun handoffs to Zach Moss. It took forever, it felt like, to develop, and most of the times lost 2 or 3 yards. And so that's where, like, you look at right now, like that game specifically, and you look at how they started the game early on, it does not feel like Shane Steichen has any faith in the run game. And credit to your colleague in Nate Atkins for putting at least stats out there to back that up. First 8 games of the season for the Colts, they averaged 130 rushing yards per game, 4.5 yards per carry. Last 5 games for the Colts, just 81 rushing yards per game, 3.3 yards per carry. So we're talking about almost a 50-yard difference between the first half of the year running the ball versus the last month running the ball. I don't know, George, whether it's philosophy, whether it's just the offensive line coming back to the means, whether it's Zach Moss running out of gas and teams now selling out to stop the run because they see, hey, it's Gardner Minshew. We can't push the ball deep. Let's just sell out to stop the run and take our chances in the pass game. And really, for most games outside of Tennessee, that worked well for opponents. It's a lot of factors, I think, that go into it. But the reality is, this is where Shane Steichen has to get creative and not allow the Colts to get one-dimensional on offense. You have to establish the run. Like I said, the Steelers right now are tied for second in turnover differential at plus 10. They're a bend but don't break defense in the sense that they'll give you 20 to 20. Like, they'll give you all the yards you want. But it's not only that they get stops in the red zone, they get turnovers in the red zone. I've never seen a defense, and I don't have the numbers exactly to back it up, but I would bet a lot of money right now. There's no team in the NFL that has more red zone turnovers than the Steelers do. I feel like anytime you watch a game, there's an interception in the end zone or a fumble force. Like, they do a tremendous job of forcing turnovers deep in their own end. And for Gardner Minshew, George, if you give him the ball 42 times, the odds tell you he's going to turn it over. And so that's why, if you're the Colts, like, establishing the run or just getting some sort of balance, doing what the Bengals did, keeping you honest, bare minimum on Saturday is a massive key for this offense. And that's where it's going to get creative, where it's not just Zach Moss. It's going to be Isaiah McKenzie. It's maybe Josh Downs on some sweeps as well. Maybe it's having Gardner Minshew once or twice early on in the game, pull the ball in a zone read and run it himself. Like, I think Shane this week more than ever has to really dial in terms of creativity in the run game. We've seen him do it in the pass game countless times, but in the run game specifically, George, I think you're going to need his creativity to be at a 10 out of 10 here to get some sort of ground game established, because the last month, and we just read it with Nate's stats he pointed out here, the run game, when they just tried to downhill run the ball, has not been effective whatsoever. And we're also recording this on Tuesday, so still a lot of time, but seems doubtful. It does not seem like, George, Jonathan Taylor is going to come save the day on Saturday.
No, I mean, we'll see. Non-answer again from Shane about that on Monday, but we'll see a little bit today. They'll have the estimated practice report, and if he's anything but out for that, then there'll be some speculation, and we'll see how it goes. But there's no doubt, even if he's back, you're going to have to run the ball more creatively than what you've done. I think there's a lot of factors. You mentioned a lot of them in there. As far as, I don't think the offensive line has been as solid the last few weeks as they were early in the season. I don't think that the Colts have been as creative with how they're using the run game as they were early in the season. But I also think at some point, I mean, Gardner Minshew now has started. This is their 13th, 14th game, and you had week 5 was when AR went out. So this will be his 8th or 9th start.
And you had week 3 against the Ravens, Gardner started. So I think it's 14 minus, I think AR started 4 games, finished 1. So this is going to be his 10th start and 13th game out of 14.
Which, is, I think at some point you've hit the wall with what you can do to scheme around your backup quarterback. I mean, he's been out there so long now that I think defenses have a really good idea of what this offense is with him. And it goes back to what you're saying. Now you've got to find a way to open up that run game, because they have, most of these teams have had the same idea, and it's what you were just talking about. We're going to sell out against the run. The only team that paid for it was Tennessee. That's the only team that got beat deep with the passing game because of doing it. No one else has had to deal with that, and so no one else has pulled out of that philosophy. And I'm sure Pittsburgh's not going to change it. And why would they, coming into this year? And that's what we were talking about after that Titans game. Those 2 big passes to Tyler Pierce. If you do that consistently, then it was going to change the way defense would prepare for this team. Now you go back to Cincinnati. It was checkdowns again and not really looking 14s away. And the same result as far as, what that did to the run game, what it did to the offense as a whole. I'm sure Pittsburgh at least going to come out. They may have plans to switch if they do get, Pierce early, but I'm sure they're going to come out and say, load up on the run, put it all on Gardner Minshew's shoulders and see if they can find a way to win the game. Again, Tennessee's the only team in its last stretch that paid for doing that. Tampa Bay, for whatever reason, didn't do it. So there's the two differences. Tampa Bay did not load up against the run. They dropped back and tried to keep everything underneath, and it opened up. And both Taylor and Moss had big days in that game.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else has, with some degree of success, loaded that box and dared Gardner Minshew to beat them and come away either with a victory or feeling like their defense did their part in winning the day. So Pittsburgh, I'm sure, going to do the same thing. I think it comes back to what you're talking about. You've got to find a way, whatever it is, whether it's more. They did a lot of that in the past with McKenzie and Downs and trying to get those guys. As recently as Tennessee, you had a carry from Kylan Granson. Whatever little wrinkle you want to throw in there, this is the week. Because, again, there should be all stops out this week. There should be absolutely nothing held back. If there's a play you've been waiting to call, this is the week to call it. If there's a scheme you've been waiting to run, this is the week to run it. Because, yeah, they're 3 games after this, but what they mean and, the tenor and the narratives surrounding them are going to be completely different based on the outcome on Saturday.
And even, too, whether it's stealing a page from the Bengals book and screen him to death. We'll see about the status of TJ Watt. He's in concussion protocol, so maybe there's a chance he doesn't play. But if he does play, him and Alex Highsmith are tremendous off the edge. How you slow down those great edge rushers is by screening them to death. And now all of a sudden having them not only respect the run, but also think even Minshew drops back. Oh, is there a screen? Do I have to drop back or not? And, play underneath, try to stop it. You saw it work to perfection for the Bengals a few times on Sunday. If you're Shane, that's one where Tyler Goodson, Trey Sermon, maybe even you lull him to sleep with Zach Moss and have him, run a few screen plays his way. Whatever it takes. Zaire Franklin. This is the week to do it, right, George? They put him in a pass route last week. I thought he was going to get at the goal line. I really did. On that 4th down, he went out in the flat, and I thought, oh, they're going to leave him alone. Smart by the Bengals to cover him up, but that opened up for Mo Alley Cox to get a touchdown. So maybe this is a week to give Zaire the ball in his hands and let him make a play. Whatever, like I said, whatever it takes, I'm fine with. But this is the week where, like you said, if you are saving trick plays, if you're saving maybe even a wrinkle or two in the run game and the pass game, this is the week you break it out. This is the week where everything is thrown to the wall, nothing is held back, and you do whatever it takes to try to beat the Steelers here. It's going to be, it's an all hands on deck sort of game. Again, the magnitude cannot be overstated whatsoever. Indy's going to be buzzing downtown all day with 2 massive games going on, with Purdue taking on Arizona as well. So it's going to be an electric atmosphere, George. And it has to be a game where the Colts do kind of feed off of that. And I think part of that is getting some sort of balance on offense established. So that way you can move the ball early on, because, too, one of the fastest ways to get a crowd out of a game is by falling behind early. And you saw Cincinnati, you down 14-0 right away. To their credit, you get it even at halftime, but down 14-0 fast here is not a recipe for success, especially against this Steelers team that, unlike the Bengals, know how to play with the lead and are really built with Watt and Highsmith and that turnover-prone defense. They are built to play with the lead. You cannot, George, be going down 10-0, 13-0, 14-0 early like they did last week.
No, that's absolutely cannot happen. Those screen games you're talking about, that's what I meant when I was saying that the coaching staff had a bad day. There were a lot of elements where that happened, but Cincinnati neutralized this defense completely. Yeah. They did exactly what you had to do. Those screenplays slowed down the pass rush. It was one of the biggest reasons the Colts didn't have a sack. And it opened things up so T. Higgins had a couple of big catches later in the game. You cannot allow anything like that to happen again on Saturday. And you got to take it too. You got to be the aggressor this time. And I think that's where the challenge for Shane Steichen is to, hey, Cincinnati was able to take away what the Colts defense does best. Now it's on Shane Steichen's plate. Can he take away what this Pittsburgh Steelers defense does best? Because the Steelers defense is what leads this team. I don't think that's a mystery to anyone. You know, when they get hot and they get these turnovers and they flip field position, the Steelers win games. And if you can find a way to neutralize them the way the Bengals did the Colts, then you'll walk out of there with a victory. There's no question.
Not that they were tepid to start, because again, you threw the ball, I believe it was 3 straight times opening drive. So they were aggressive, if you will. But it did feel a little bit, looking back in Cincinnati, like the Colts are kind of feeling out the Bengals. Like if it's like a prize fight, you're kind of, circling around, getting a feel for their opponent. This is one, George, where as soon as that bell rings, you come out swinging. You come out throwing haymakers, trying to knock around the first round, and you come out, like I said, being the aggressor. There is no excuse. Again, win or lose, there is no excuse for us to be talking after the game about the Colts not being the aggressors, not being the more desperate team, and not coming out with energy and playing like their hair's on fire. Like that is bare minimum here, what to expect. And I think we should see that right away in the first quarter of this game, because of not only the importance of the game, but how the Colts played last week. I think that first quarter, George, is definitely going to be an indication of how things go for the rest of the game, where if they come out aggressive, they come out confident, playing loose, playing free, you can feel like, okay, this was a game where that loss last week is a benefit. They come out sluggish, hesitant, and maybe unsure of themselves. That's where you can already look and say, well, that Bengals loss really maybe opened up some big wounds here. And that's, the confidence is shot. And now you're seeing a young team in a big moment just completely crumble.
There's no question. There were some flaws exposed, some things they got away with during the 4-game winning streak that they absolutely did not get away with on Sunday. And you've got to put, DeForest Buckner said it, you got to put this fire out quick. And I think that's the key now. Defensively, you've got to lock back down and get pressure on the pocket. And offensively, like you said, balance. You've got to have balance. However, whatever form that takes, you've got to find a way to not put yourself in that one-dimensional mode again. You're
right. You're absolutely right. It's going to be the start, without a doubt, is going to be fast here, and having balance, offense especially, is going to be a major key for this game. We will dive more into the actual matchups here, what to watch out for on Thursday's pod. Mike DeFavo will join us as well to break it down for the Steelers' perspective, friend of the pod. So very excited about that, for him to join us as well and give us the Pittsburgh point of view, as Mitch Trubisky. I don't think we announced this on the pod, but just to officially announce it, it was Kenny Pickett, to shock no one, has been officially ruled out. So it is going to be Mitch Trubisky starting for the second game in a row here for the Steelers on Saturday, which again, now you talk about another game, George, where things are even in the sense that the Colts are playing the backup quarterback. And like you mentioned, the book is out on Minshew at this point, making his 10th start. That's fair. But this is another game where Steelers have their own backup quarterback. So it's like, it is one of those things that does even out and is not a big advantage for Pittsburgh, since Mitch, seeing how he played Thursday night, you'd much rather have Gardner Minshew than Mitch Trubisky. That is for sure. So battle the backups here again for the second week in a row, this time at Lucas Oil Stadium on Saturday. We'll get you all set, everything you need to know, every matchup to watch out for when we do return here on Thursday. Again, if you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Blue Horseshoe Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube as well, Blue Horseshoe Pod. That is where you can watch us 3 times a week. Have a great rest of your week. We'll be back to get rooting for what is a big playoff game on Thursday, right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.